I am Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. A series of incidents in which white bystanders, business owners, and employees called the police on Black Americans has reignited conversations about racial profiling in the United States. We explore the realities of living while Black. That's today live on Al Jazeera and YouTube. So leave your comments in the chat, and I'll do my best to include as many as possible in our discussion.
Hi, my name is Adeshola Bello, Coordinating Manager for Freedom Foundation Nigeria, and you are in the stream.
You're already criminalized when you're wearing black skin, says Darren Martin, a former Obama White House staffer who was mistaken for a burglar while moving into his apartment in New York City. Darren's story of being questioned by neighbors and police for simply being black in an allegedly white space isn't unique, nor is the outcry it sparked on social media. In Rialto, California, a group of African Americans were detained by police while checking out of their Airbnb rental when a neighbor accused them of stealing stuff. The neighbor was also concerned that the group hadn't waved to them as they left. In Oakland, police were called on a group for allegedly not following park rules and using a charcoal barbecue grill. And in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, employees of a Starbucks cafe accused two men of trespassing as they waited for a colleague to arrive. Have a look.
Don't get no fight with them. Don't get no fight with them. Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. What did they get called for?
Anti-racism activists say these incidents recall America's history of vagrancy laws, which criminalize the presence of people, often black, in public spaces. Starbucks plans to close its 8,000 U.S. locations on May 29th to conduct anti-racial bias training. But is that progress or just PR? On set with us to help us explore that question, Franchesca Ramsey is a comedian and author whose new memoir, Well, That Escalated Quickly, tells her story of becoming an accidental activist. Damon Young is the editor-in-chief of Very Smart Brothers. Sherry Williams is an assistant professor of communication at American University here in Washington, D.C. And via Skype in Lagos, Nigeria, Lolade Shiambola is a Yale University student who was questioned by campus police when a white classmate took issue with her sleeping in the common area of her dorm building. So welcome to the stream, everyone. So I want to start on my laptop here with a headline. This is from the LA Times. New Starbucks policy, no purchase needed to use restrooms or to sit in cafes. And they begin this article by saying, medical emergency, burglary, and physical assault. These are the few instances in which Starbucks is now saying that employees should call the police. What do you make of it, Sherry?
Well, what I make of that is that in this country, we actually have to be instructed on when and when not to call the police on black people, because for decades, for centuries, we have had a series of laws that really have pretty much regulated black existence in the public. You know, immediately after slavery, the black codes were enacted, which were a series of laws. It was a way to continue to relegate black people's presence and really keep them relegated in public spaces. Then moving on into Reconstruction, there was the convict leasing system in which black people could be arrested for any minor infraction, a nonviolent infraction, you know, for doing pretty much anything. And then once they came into the system, their labor could be leased out to private companies, private citizens, and one of those things in which they could be arrested for was loitering. But then we moved on over into the 1960s civil rights era. In the 50s and 60s, sometimes civil rights activists were arrested for loitering while they were in the process of actively resisting white supremacy. Moving on over into the 80s and 90s, cities across the country were trying to grapple with gang activity, so they started to again enact more loitering and vagrancy laws. So what they ended up really doing was arresting a lot of black and brown youth who looked like gang members, because what does a gang member look like? Right. In this contemporary context, a gang member looks like somebody who is not white, right?
And that was in my home state, that was Illinois and Chicago, where that was going down there. So a whole history lesson there. Thank you very much. Succinct, but you packed it in there. I think our audience will appreciate that. Franchesca, what do you make of Starbucks' announcement and this new policy change?
I think it's strange because I've always understood it to be that a coffee shop is a place for people to chat and hang out and work with the understanding that they're probably going to spend money. And so now that they have to outrightly say it in response to this major gaffe is really troubling, because what it says is that a lot of their employees are carrying around this bias and that it's being supported by their management, but also by the police. And I just think that it's really sad that we need to have this like list of situations for them to help them determine when it's appropriate to call the police. And also the fact that as white people, they have this inherent privilege where police officers are going to believe whatever it is they say about a black person. And that then puts us in danger, which is really scary.
And as you're talking there, Damon, before you get in there, what we're watching on our screens now is the protests, the people who heard about this and immediately took to Twitter and then took to the streets and took to Starbucks around the country, really, to protest this. Damon.
Yeah, it's just surreal that that a sign or a mandate saying "Don't be racist" is necessary, particularly in a space like a coffee shop, which, for people who, they are a part of urban communities where people go, they work, they sit, they meet with people, they have conversations, and the fact that this large corporation actually has to tell their workers, you know what, you probably should not be racist today, and to actually have a day of just telling them, just printing out on billboards, don't be racist, don't be racist, don't be racist, don't be racist. Again, it's one of those things that just articulates the absurdity of white supremacy and of America.
What's also really frustrating, I mean, I commend them on one hand because they're trying, but there's so many instances that don't take place in a business establishment, whether it's the people calling about Airbnb, or the woman at the barbecue. There's just so many instances where white folks are calling 911 for no reason. I feel like we need some sort of checklist for them, kind of like the green eggs and ham type of the nursery rhyme, are black people having fun? Please do not call 911. Just make it a little rhyme so there's little scenarios to kind of go through the list, maybe.
That just might work because it rhymes.
Make it fun.
I like that you mentioned other examples. I want to share one that our community members actually shared with us. This is Catherine on Twitter. She says, my mom and I stopped by an aunt's house to visit. She wasn't home, so we waited in our car. Police were called because we looked suspicious. She goes on to say, it was another sad reminder that just being black is enough to stir suspicion, even when doing something innocent like waiting outside your aunt's house. And in this case, it wasn't deadly. We have seen other cases where waiting in a car can be deadly. That's one example. There are a long list, a whole host of others. Lolade, there's actually an example of yours in which you became pretty well known for sleeping. Do you want to tell us what happened? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was, taking a nap in the common room of my dorm, and, the lights came on at about 1:45 in the morning. Another student was just kind of shouting at me, you're not supposed to be here. Why are you sleeping in here? And from my friend's description of her from the previous time that she had called the police on him, I thought this was the same person. So I asked, are you the same person who called the police on my friend just a few months ago? And she starts going in about how I'm not supposed to be there and she's going to call the police. And so she did. And so the videos that were posted to my Facebook page were pretty much the interactions after that.
What happened with the university? Have they stepped in?
You mean the response?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so Yale issued a number of statements, most of them, talking about diversity and inclusion and how, that we still need to do more work to make Black students and people of color feel welcome at the university. They have not once condemned the actions of the student who called the police on me. They have not once condemned the behavior of the police. And they have not spoken at all about consequences for, the weaponization of police against Black bodies or consequences for racial discrimination.
The thing that jumped out to me Lola, the thing that jumped out to me in that scene is when the student says, "I have every right to call the police." You're not allowed to sleep in that room. Every right. It sounds entitled. It sounds privileged. What did you make of it when you saw this video? Because of course it's gone viral.
Well, what I make of it is, again, just this embodiment of this history of white people being able to be around black people when they want to be around them, right? And if I don't feel like they belong in this space, then I have the right to make sure that they are ejected from this space. And I think there are some ideas too that we still have about like black criminality and black conspiracy, because a lot of these vagrancy laws and a lot of these laws that have existed throughout time really have been about white people's fear of black people and fear of black congregation and what black people would do if they come together. Because I mean, I, even as a contemporary grown woman in my past 20 years of work in the workplace, have even experienced at the water cooler, at the copy machine, standing with another black colleague or two or three, and don't let it be four, a white colleague would even say, "What are you guys conspiring to do over here? What are you guys cooking up over here?" And I know that was just like a really, blanket statement. The person didn't mean any harm, but it just evokes these ideas about black fear. And even some of these stores, like corner stores in black and brown neighborhoods, have these policies, just like maybe written on notebook paper on the door, no more than two people in here at a time, two or three people. So these ideas of black people being together and being destructive and dangerous are really deeply rooted in the American psyche.
And I'm not even sure if it's so much of like this mortal fear of like, okay, this black person's here, I'm in fear of my life. Like, it's almost as if white people consider the police to be their own personal Apple Care, where like black people are like this app that just isn't working correctly, and they need to call customer service real quick to just get rid of the problem. Like we're like some virus or some spyware that they wish someone could come and clean up really quick. And the thing is, when they do that, while they might be thinking, okay, I just want the black people removed, introducing the police to black people could be a potentially lethal situation. And that's how, sometimes we end up dead.
Right.
Because of these phone calls, because of this annoyance, this feeling of, I just don't expect them to be in this space. And so I want them removed from this space because I feel uncomfortable.
And Lolade, I can see you nodding there, but I wanted to bring in this comment via YouTube Live. E. Walker says, "This has been going on in America for centuries. It is one of the, quote, don't trust white people warnings given to us by our elders. One warning to be careful as they want to give you a record." So this is one person's perspective. We actually spoke to a former dispatcher about when to call the police and when not to. Have a listen to Christopher Carver. He's the operations director for the National Emergency Number Association, and that's a group that provides policy and education to 911 centers around the U.S. Have a look.
There are obviously things that are non-emergencies that cause challenges for 911 centers, such as power outages, such as sometimes barking dog complaints cannot be an emergency. We've even had examples of 911 calls in the United States for events at a fast food restaurant where there was a certain kind of food that was no longer available. In those cases, obviously the issue is not one that justifies the use of a life-threatening, a number designed for life-threatening emergencies. However, in any other cases where it's more in doubt, where the caller doesn't know exactly what's going on, and they make that call to 911, then it falls upon 911 dispatchers to do the best they can with the information that's reported.
So, Francesca, dispatchers have to use their judgment, but what about the people calling? I mean, you heard some of the reasons.
People are often not telling the truth. That's a huge part of the problem, and I think.
How so? What does that mean?
I mean, saying, I believe that this person has a gun. That's something that we've heard people call in and say to the police, or in an instance with the Airbnb, I don't believe that usually people who are stealing bring suitcases with them. I just think that that's a little strange. And so I agree with Lolade that there should be consequences. And so if you are making these calls to police officers, you should be held responsible for, the cost of taxpayer dollars that are being used to bring out 8 and 9, 10 police officers for a potential robbery. And I think you know, there's a bigger conversation to be had about racial bias, but I think one thing is that money does talk, and that if people saw real financial consequences, then maybe more would think twice before picking up the phone to call police about a frivolous incident, which oftentimes I think is really just a power play. You know, with the barbecue situation, it really kind of felt like, oh no, you're gonna listen to me, and if you don't listen to me, then I'm gonna call the police. And just because knowing our fraught history with the police, that word automatically shuts down some conversations, and people will say, well, I would like to live today, so I will leave. I'm gonna go, I'm gonna, you know, see my way out. And I think in that situation especially, we have so much footage, and you can really see that she was kind of seemingly thrown off by the fact that these guys were not intimidated by her. And that's why she was willing to stay on the phone for 2 hours, I believe, waiting for the police officers. And I think she was wasting the time of those 911 dispatchers who could have been responding to a real situation. And so she should face consequences for that.
And so we saw a video of that playing. I want to show this headline here. This is the San Francisco Chronicle. Even in Oakland, calling the cops on Black people just living their lives. And of course, because we could see the person who did the calling, she has since been memed. Memes that look like this. The people are calling her Barbecue Becky. That is not her name. But Zelly tweets, who did this? And you can see her there in the back of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. At the march in D.C. Yeah, here she is calling on the Obamas. This person has been in tears all day. They tweet, that's right, I have a tan suit, she writes. So making light of the situation, because sometimes the only thing you can do is laugh. But I wanted to go to this tweet here. This is directed right to you, Lolade. Kindle says, if Lolade wasn't allowed to sleep in that particular room, she should have contacted on-campus staff or the DA. And I think she's referring to the student who called the police on you. But calling the police was blowing the situation way out of proportion. And I would just like to know what made Lolade look as if she didn't belong.
Yeah.
What do you think it is, Lolade?
I mean, it's obvious, and I think everything that we've said about you know, people utilizing the police as their personal Apple Care is true, but also the history of America. You know, it's interesting that this fear of Black congregation and this fear of even Black joy is so similar to, you know, post-slavery era and Reconstruction era, and, you know, the patterns just seem so identical. This fear of, you know, Black people are free, they're living their lives, we don't like this, they should be on the plantation, they should be in prison, it's not okay. I mean, I think that there's something very deep in the white American psyche that tells them that a Black person being free is a problem. And, you know, that's a problem that needs to be resolved every time.
Damon?
And this is for people like, you know, like Sarah, not necessarily all white Americans.
Right.
Yeah, in Pittsburgh right now, there's like an issue going on in one of the communities that is kind of like synopsizes this whole conversation, where there's this very hyper gentrified community called East Liberty. And in this community, this is actually where I'm from. And in this community, there's a billboard that has been erected that each month a different artist has an opportunity to put like a phrase on the billboard. And it's just a piece of art that exists in a neighborhood. People look at the billboards, look at the sayings, and, you know, oh, that's cool, that's clever, and don't really think anything of it. And so a couple months ago, a Black artist by the name of Alicia Wormsley had a phrase up there that said there are Black people in the future. And that became an issue.
No.
Really?
The landlord contacted the person who's in charge of the art installation, asked him to take it down. There were panels about this. There were news articles about this. Like, this was a big Pittsburgh deal.
And why do you think that was?
Well, one, I think that, you know, as everyone has said so far on the panel, is that just the idea of Blackness, right? Just the idea, oh, I have to think that there. I don't even know if I want to live if there are Black people, you know, in the future.
Right.
So there's that. But again, just the idea of that existing is a threat to people.
Enough to make people want to have it taken down. So I like that you took us into the future. Black people exist in the future. But I want to move us to the past just for a second, because we got a video comment from the Dean of the University of Virginia School of Law. And she raises a point that you raised a little bit earlier, Terry. Have a listen to what she said.
When you look at these incidents in historical perspective, they have a very long pedigree going all the way back to the beginning of this country and England, where there were laws that really essentially made it a crime to be a person who was out of place in any way. In the 1970s, the Supreme Court made it more difficult for the police to use such laws, and they struck down a number of those laws. But as you can see from these incidents, they still continue. There are still some laws on the books that are in a similar vein.
So Sherry, she says, there's a history here, which is a point that you were raising. Do you think, though, that that's in the minds of people when they're calling the police? It can't be. They're not thinking of the 14th Amendment and what led to it, which is the right to
I don't
assemble.
think they are thinking about that, but I think that there have been, but just having this built into the DNA of the country and into the system and the laws, and there having been an extension of all of this, I think is what is kind of evoking in people's minds. Again, so these laws were basically enacted to be able to restrict and relegate Black people's presence in public, and that is connected to white people's fear of Black people. So I think it's really important that we recognize that, and I think it's really important for white people to do some work and really recognize that too. So when I am making this call, what am I actually doing, right? How does this overture really connect to this person's life and just what is going on, and especially in this contemporary context, because it's just not the time for people to be calling the police on Black people for just simply existing and actually embodying joy. Because that's why the park incident just really kind of teed me off, because Black people just having a barbecue with Frankie Beverly in the background, that's a crime now. You know what I mean? It's just it's out of hand. But again, this country does have a history of not only just relegating Black people, but anyone who is not an able-bodied heterosexual white man. There were laws on the books, and this, the Anti-Vagrancy Act in the 1850s relegated the movements of Mexican people out in California.
Right.
There were a series of laws called the Ugly Laws that existed up until the 1970s, which basically said someone who had a physical deformity or what was perceived as a physical deformity or any kind of physical disability was not allowed to be seen in public. So what I do in my media classes is I really try to make connections for students, because it's important to know this history and know why. If it was illegal for a Black person, a disabled person, a Mexican person to actually exist in public, then that's also connected to why we do and don't see people reflected in the media.
Right.
And how they're reflected in the media.
So other than learning history and recognizing it and recognizing how it plays into today's scenarios, what to do about this? You wrote a book.
Yes.
And in it,
Hold it up, get that promo.
all the way in the end, close to the end of the book, you have some suggestions for recognizing privilege and how to tell others to recognize privilege in a way that won't have them turn off. Because a lot of people might be watching this show and think they're being racist.
Right. Well, I think one of the things I talk about a lot in my work is speaking up and not over. And I think, especially in situations where Black bodies or marginalized people are in danger, that's when we need allies to actually step up. And I think too often people are very comfortable with just saying, I'm an ally and I changed my Facebook profile picture to, Black Lives Matter. But then when I'm in Starbucks, I mute when the police show up. I don't stand up and say, actually, those people didn't do anything wrong. And I believe in the barbecue video, the woman that was filming was actually challenging her, and I think that that's really important, because unfortunately, those people are not going to listen to my voice. And those are going to be situations where I'm not trying to get arrested. I'm not trying to, be in danger. And so we really need people to step up and have those conversations with the members of their family who might be watching these events and saying, well, maybe they did do something wrong, or I don't understand what the big deal is.
Right.
That's when we need you to step up and explain to the people that you care about and the people that you have relationships with that this is not okay,
right,
so that hopefully they aren't calling the police next time, or they aren't making excuses for someone who has.
I see you nodding there.
Oh, I disagree. I agree with everything you're saying. It's up to them, because we are not going to be able to infiltrate those like crucibles of whiteness, those Thanksgiving tables, those happy hours, those carpools, those family reunions that are those all-white cookouts with the awkward potato salad served, and we're not going to be able to have those conversations with them then, and that's when it's up to the white people who consider themselves to be allies or
Right.
progressive or
and
whatever.
David, and the ones
to
who
be
are
there.
watching this show.
Yes.
That's all the time we have. So I have to thank all of our guests for having this conversation and for our audience for viewing. You can keep the conversation going online at #AJStream.